Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Commander Clash podcast, where we talk all things Commander. And this week, we are ranking every Commander archetypes. So things like artifact decks, enchantress decks, graveyard decks. We're going to try to rank them all according to power on average, right? So not a specific commander, but on average, what does a graveyard deck look like? On average, what does a Lifegain deck look like? So it should be an interesting one. Joined with me today is Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive. How you doing?
I'm doing super well. Should be a fun topic.
Budget Commander Tomer, what's up?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to rank things. I like ranking things in tier lists.
Krim, the Asian Avenger, and the little asterisk besides Mill. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Why is there an asterisk next to Mill?
What is Mr. Mime doing here, Krim? That is the real question.
He's my outside assistant. He's my emotional support mime. Okay, leave me alone.
He's
What,
here to
Mr.
outvote us
Mime?
on Mill. That's what he's actually here for.
I count as 2 votes.
Secret Lair foreshadowing. Next Secret Lair coming up, Mr. Mime. Just Mr.
I
Mime.
wish. I wish. Most underrated Pokemon.
And I am the Codfather Richard. And today we're going to talk about Commander archetypes. And I basically took the top ones from EDH Rec and kind of merged some of them. Some of them are pretty similar. And I tried to make it broad enough. We have 17 to get through today. So hopefully we can get that done. Before we do that, though, I want to shout out our sponsors, Ultimate Guard. Premium protection for your trading cards. All the gaming accessories we use on this channel are from Ultimate Guard. So you can get your deck boxes, playmats, and sleeves over at ultimateguard.com. And also Card Conduit, the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. You can skip all the typing, time, and work associated with buy listing. Their curated service lets you send in as many cards as you want with buy list value of $1 or more, and you pay just a 5% service fee. You can use their sorted service where you list and sort your cards and pay only 2%. You get a detailed report and fast payment once your order is processed. You can get 10% off by heading over to cardconduit.com/mtggoldfish. So thank you to our sponsors, and it's time for the Ultimate Guard comment of the week. So last week we talked about Duskmourn cards, and top comment is from Forgetful Paladin. Krim looks like he belongs in this set.
I can see Krim being a survivor. I can see that.
That is such a compliment. Yeah.
That is the nicest compliment anyone has ever said to me. Thank you.
Yo, I wish I need to see Krim in like that 80s style thing that all the survivors are wearing, you know?
Honestly, I do already wear a leather jacket, so I could just be like, the
You're like the loner kid, right? Like,
yeah,
you're like,
yeah, the
I don't
loner
work in
kid
a
in the
team.
corner.
I'm gonna survive on my own.
Whatever, I don't need you guys. I'm gonna split up.
But then his character arc is he like learns
we
to
need
trust
a
again.
vote. In the horror movie, who dies first of the Commander Clash?
Oh, that'd be
Oh.
Who's dying
Yo,
first?
yeah, hold
Who
on.
gets taken
Who's dying
out in
first?
the intro?
YouTube comments, that's so good. YouTube comments, who?
Yeah,
Who's
I'm
the
actually
survivor?
curious.
Who's the first to go? What are the tropes? Who's the jock?
Yeah, what are the tropes of who dies first? I love it.
All right, archetype tier list. So we have 4 tiers. B will be your baseline, like average. C will be below average, mediocre. A is strong, and then S is like a cut above, right? The best of the best, right? All right. Let's kick things off with a softball. We're gonna go artifacts. Okay, and now artifact
Okay.
decks. I've
Hold up.
chosen Urtet here as the representative, but basically, like food, treasures, lots of dirtily, like mirrors. Like there's all kinds of artifact synergies. There's lands and artifacts that give you mana based on the number of artifacts you have that pump power and toughness, like Harnstructs, things like that. And then, of course, there's lots of artifact combos, unwinding clock, stuff like that. So, Krim, you are terrified of artifacts. Do you agree with an S ranking for artifacts?
I see why this is a softball, because we're all just going to unanimously agree this is an S. If you pull out an artifact deck, I don't care which one it is, I'm bringing out my best deck.
I disagree.
Ooh.
Wait,
I'm actually
Okay,
the
that's
lowest.
great.
So everybody,
Okay.
everybody ranked it S. I ranked it A. By the
Oh.
way,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So you
Okay.
still
I'm
think
the
it's
it's
whole-
really
still pretty
good.
strong.
I think
Yeah.
I think it's a second best archetype overall in casual commander. Because I think its greatest strength is that like all the the fast mana advantage engines out there happen to be artifacts. You know, your soul rings, your mana crypts, stuff that makes your artifacts all cost less to play. Like you could vomit out your hand very quickly, and you have so many combos available to you, like classic ones, like the Salt Monolith combos or whatever. They're all in artifacts. The only downside, the thing that's really holding it from an S, in my opinion, is that it's so easy and so common to just like wipe out the artifact player's entire
Are
board.
you using the F
right?
word?
Like,
Are you using the F word
Fair.
already, Tover?
so that's why I put it
One
number
farewell
2.
and artifact decks are done for.
It is true, but like also like basically any white deck, I'm just like ticking down the amount of turns I have like on my Tetsun deck, for example, until my entire board is just gone and some of my lands are gone too. Like if you're in white or you're in green, I just assume it's a matter of time that you're going to give me like a Bane of Progress, even like an Austere Command. It doesn't have to be farewell, just like any of these things, and like my board is entirely gone. And, like, yeah,
Although if it's not a
so
a
if
farewell
it's not
though,
a
there's plenty of
farewell-
ways to just like get all that stuff back and like reassemble it pretty easily. So I feel like yeah, there are some
Couple.
resilience issues where like if you get hit by the right sweeper, it can really take you out. But I have it at S tier because I think that the fact that it has the best fast mana and that it backs it up by having these almost accidental combos. It seems like every time I play artifact deck, I end up going infinite with a combo I didn't even intentionally put in my deck. They just like my cards ended up accidentally going infinite. I think for me
I
that
don't
makes
have
it a
any
pretty easy
combos.
S tier.
well, okay,
That
there's
sounds like
the
an
best.
artifact
So I
play
put
experience.
I put one archetype on the top.
What do you
so I
think is
only have
better
one
than
S.
artifacts?
Yeah, okay.
What do you think is better
We'll
than
get there.
artifacts?
We'll get there.
I am
Okay,
so
okay.
curious to see what you think
Okay.
is more.
I guess
Cauldra is not an artifact, Homer. You know that,
I don't
right?
know.
That is
We
not an
didn't say
archetype.
the multiple bests. We said the best. So if you all
Okay,
put like
okay, I can see
3
that work.
S's, there's something wrong.
Okay,
I think.
okay, fair.
I will point out it's the only thing that kind of self-sustains itself through all colors, right? Because they're artifacts, they're colorless, right? You can actually make artifact decks of each color, and there are lands that support it. So like Buried Ruins to return stuff, and then Academy Ruins if you're in blue. Okay. Let's go with the other saucy one. Mill. Now, Mill is this is 2 types of decks, I guess. So you mill your opponents out, right? Instead of killing them, going to 0 life, you bring their library to 0 and then they die. I guess self mill counts as
Oh.
well if you're trying to self.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Wait,
hold on,
South
hold on.
Mills
I can
included
change my
in
grade.
this?
Why
Oh.
not? It's mill, but I
Yeah.
mean, we're not going to
Okay.
include Thorical.
Oh,
Like we're
I'm
not
bumping
including
my grade.
CDH
Wait,
combos
isn't that a
here, right?
that's a graveyard deck though? I think if you're
Is it?
self
No, no, that's not.
no.
That's not
If
the
you
same.
if you mill yourself to Jace Wielder of Mysteries, that's a self mill deck, right? If you're milling yourself to reanimate, then that's a graveyard deck. But
Oh, that's
That's getting a bump
that
up on the
complicates
grade.
or
things.
you
So
guys changing
milling
self-mill
your
mill?
opponent out is like C tier, or even there probably should be a D on our rankings
calm-
just for mill.
calm-
Like
calm
it's like
down.
milling your opponent out is really
Okay,
calm
bad.
down, Seth.
Like,
Let's hit milling your opponents out here. So
yeah, milling your opponents
uh,
out is not good, right? Like
D.
you have
It's a D
300
for me.
cards you have to empty from libraries, and if you end up 1 card short, your whole deck does nothing. It's not like furthering the rest of your game plan. So I think mill is like one of the worst archetypes if you're trying to do that.
I think
I
out of
think
all
that
the
it's-
archetypes, it's the worst one. No, like it's like it is the bottom of the
Whoa.
barrel.
It's in the
no?
lowest
Whoa.
tier for me. I don't
Whoa,
know if it's
these
like
are
the
strong
lowest,
words.
but it's definitely
No.
the lowest
what's
tier.
lower
No.
than mill.
Voltron 1/1 counters.
Turn
like
turn is pretty
like-
bad.
Okay, Krim, as the mill lover, where do you put mill?
mill is a strong B if I'm milling my opponents out. Because honestly, if it weren't for half of the cards that I like playing being banned on Commander Clash, I could mill to the point where it's absurd, right?
Wait, what
So-
what
banned
mill cards
on
are
Commander
banned?
Clash?
Yeah.
that
There are
furthers
there are no mill cards on the ban list, but things
No
that I would
staple
throw in the,
Ristic
the
study.
deck just to like completely keep my foot on the gas pedal, right?
What, Field of the
So
Dead?
like
I'm confused.
Ristics, there's so
Mana
many
Crypt.
things in here that I could be using that really keep the mill engine going, right? So and to like it's an archetype that I think is very, very solid at doing what it wants to do built correctly. Hitting the graveyard is something that you should do. I'm not trying the way I build the mill like for content is like I am not building it to hate out every like all your graveyards. I'm just being cute and I'm playing Ghost Vacuum. I'm using the themes of the week. But if I were to build efficiently, I'm gonna exile your graveyard every turn. I play Leyline of the Void, Planar Void. Seth got me with that. He put me on that card. And then, so yeah, I'm playing nothing but graveyard exile and pure mill. I think if it's built correctly, it is a very strong archetype. And it's an archetype where you are rewarded the most probably for your decision tree because you cannot mill like all wildly, right? Like you have to be strategical with how you mill, who you mill, when to go for the big mill.
But if you play Mind Skinner, you're just milling everybody, right?
Well,
you
Mind
can't
Skinner,
control that. So here's a problem with mill. We have 3 C's and then Crim with the B. So there's 2 problems with mill. One is you're all on your own. Like no one else is helping you. So like if you play burn or you're playing creatures or something, right? Like other people are taking damage. You're not dealing 40 to everyone, right? You're only dealing 30 or 20 or 10.
What are you talking about?
Something.
Seth helps me every week. He draws like 100 cards.
I mean, maybe if they draw 40 cards, they're helping you, but are you really beating them once they've drawn 40 cards, right? So that's the problem 1. And problem 2 is in the meantime, you are helping everybody, right? Like before they're dead, right? As their library gets lower, you're fueling their graveyard with things like anger, with reanimation targets, with flashback cards. And until they're dead, that's like very scary, right? You need the second combo piece out, which is what Crim was hinting at the graveyard hate, right? But if you don't have that graveyard hate, it's kind of sus, right? And then it's not like you avoid building the graveyard deck. Like sometimes it's just a random creature deck and they have an Eerie Ultimatum in there. And like you're not gonna be able to know it's coming, right? Like you stick your hate on some other opponent and then the Eerie Ultimatum comes out. So those are the fundamental problems with mill.
If I see Abzan, I know they're playing Eerie Ultimatum. 2, the same argument can be made that it's like, what if Eerie Ultimatum gets discarded or milled?
Yeah.
Right. So like, if it's milled, then what are they going to do?
But none of the other strategies could potentially help. I mean, I guess like if you're playing burn and your opponent's on Death Shadow, they're like, yeah, right. But like in general, as you lower their life total, there's no risk of helping them, right? Whereas the graveyard decks and stuff
what if you're playing Lifegain and someone's playing Screaming Nemesis, right? And like
that card is.
What if you're on Artifacts and someone's playing Stony Silence, right? What if your internet cuts out while you're playing, right?
That's different. That's like
graveyard recursion is something that most decks are going to have, right? Like that's like a very common staple of the format. That if you build a good commander deck, you're probably going to have some ways to recur stuff from the graveyard.
Sure. But like, how often does the thing they're reoccurring matter to you? If we're talking about Underworld Breach, then I'm playing around that, right? As a mill player, I should be prepared for Underworld Breach. If they're just like, all right, cool, I'm gonna Skullwinder you, okay.
Yeah, I mean, you have to prepare for it, but all these other archetypes don't have to deal with that. Like, as you put +1/+1 counters on your creatures, you don't need to worry that Seth is randomly gaining an advantage, right? Whereas mill, that's like another thing you need to worry about on top of like your regular game plan, right?
Like you have to toe the line there, and that is why I think that mill is a very skill-intensive archetype.
You
right?
have to work very hard to make it.
Yeah,
but that makes it work.
Very hard to be at parity, right?
The payoff is not good.
Yes,
that's why it's low.
But
it's also
no, that's not that doesn't make it bad, right? Control is technically the same. So
all right, like let's talk about control then.
Wait. I wanted to say one thing about mill. I didn't get a chance to say anything. Come on. One thing about mill is that also casual players hate being milled. So you actually are actually getting bad threat assessed. Being the mill player, you got more hate than you deserve because a lot of casual players will be like, you milled my best card, or like they were hoping to top deck a land and you milled a land and they're like, Crim, I hate you. You milled this card that I really want in my hand. And you can't logic out of it. You can't be like, well, what if it was on the bottom of your library and you never saw it this game? It doesn't matter. People just have an irrational hate for mill. So I feel like running mill, even if you're the weakest deck at the table, you just get more hate because you're running something the casual players irrationally hate. And I think that's another strike against it. Like,
Wait,
get
that's a Mark. That's a Mark
That's a
4.
positive for
That's a positive. I love that people
makes
are
it less
angry
powerful.
when I'm
Tier.
milling.
evil. That's a plus.
We filmed a clash and I'm getting hit for just milling and I was not the threat, and I love that. That's the highest form of respect. If I wasn't getting hit, if I wasn't a threat, y'all wouldn't hit me. Right? So
I will say it is
acknowledged.
one of the most annoying archetypes here.
It
Right? Like of
is.
things that don't kill you but are super annoying. Like you don't want your combo piece milled, right? Like you don't want the key card milled. So people do get annoyed.
Hell yeah.
Okay. Control. Now we're all over the table on control here. Tomer, where would you put control?
So I'm seeing everybody's rankings, and I put it much
Oh,
higher
wait,
than
hold on.
everybody else.
I don't know why
Grant,
I wrote
thank
that
you.
wrong.
Thank you. So the same issue with mill is control. A lot of people don't like being played against control because they don't like their stuff being answered. They don't like being interacted with. And you could say like, "Oh, I'm helping you stop the other people," but really, like you're kind of also advancing your own goal because you just want to go later on in the game. The later your game goes on, the more ways you can lock out the rest of the table and have answers for everything they do. But the difference between control and mill is the reason why people hate you is because you're shutting down their game. So even if they hate you, they can't do so much about it. And my best performing deck is actually a control deck. It's Toshiro Umezawa. I don't play it anymore because it's too good. All it does is it kills your opponent's creatures. And it turns out, even if you're not a creature deck, if your like commander just keeps dying over and over again and your deck is built around your commander, you can't do anything. You just lose. So I can't play my control deck anymore because it's too good. So I don't know. I put it as an A because of that.
We should play your Umezawa deck against my Miku deck.
Oh yeah, well,
The
lanes
child
are a
of
little
Alara
bit tough.
Miku.
Lanes are a little bit tough. But if you're focused on creatures or like anything that's focused on creatures, it's just loses. But like other control decks too, that's like one type of control. I think control decks are actually like hidden OP in casual commander because you can just wreck your opponent's game plans so efficiently.
I think
Sound
control's
really
like
for
pretty
control.
medium. I think it's pretty medium. Like it's okay. And yes, sure, like you can cast a Wrath every turn and like get some wins, but it's kind of like mill too, where like my experience playing Commander Clash is the control player gets a lot of hate because no one likes their thing getting countered. No one likes their board getting Wrath every turn. So we've had a lot of games where like Crim's on the control deck and Crim gets kind of arguably almost unfairly murdered just because people want to like resolve their spells and play their game, even though Crim's not really an actual threat to win the game at that point. So I think you pay a bit of a tax on playing control. So yes, it can be very strong, but the fact that you're going to be the arch enemy at a lot of tables, I think for me makes it like a B tier average archetype.
But what are you attacking me with, Seth? You're angry at me. What are you going to do about it? You're going to attack me with the creatures that got wrath? I don't think so.
But
I'm
surprised you guys rated control so high.
You got 3 opponents.
Yeah.
They got to deal
The
with it.
Wrath
How do you
takes care
counter
of all
3
of them.
opponents' spells? Like, yeah, you can't.
Like,
Board wipes.
Well, that's
I
the
put control
juggling.
down here because it's impossible to control 3 people, right? And then in order to actually do that, you need to play control stacks. So like Tox rolls, like you need to put something to lock the board down because it's impossible to like 3v1 control the board. And then you're just super hated if you're control. You're super hated if you play stacks. Like look at Tox roll on the EDH rec salt scores, right? Like that's a stacksy control thing where you're like nothing is sticking, and I have some kind of engine down. Like what's that black enchantment that Krim always plays that prevents creatures from
A spreading plague. It's
spreading
so
plague? Like
Yeah.
you got to actually do that to control the table. So I actually view control as pretty bad, and then. You really just want to play control into a combo finish, right? You control the game for like 2 turns and then combo finish, right? But like sitting there and like draw going and like trying to remove everyone's threat, it's like impossible. There's like 3 people.
You don't need to remove
angry at
everyone's
you.
threat. You just need to remove
any
one
threat
person's
that's a
threat.
threat to you, which will be basically anything on the board.
But I think
They're all
that's why
mad
it's
at
like
you.
I'm surprised Richard's against it because I remember Richard, I think on like a previous podcast you mentioned like how the true best way of winning is just like running more board wipes, and I think that's like how you built it. No, like how you build it, you just run more board wipes. That's how you deal with all 3 people at the table.
You board wipe once and then you play your thing and win the game,
Yes,
rather than like every single thing that comes down, you try to deal with it. Right, so
Yeah.
one board wipe into win con is my strategy, not board wipe into counter magic. Although I did win with the control deck, like the rat deck or whatever, right? Or
I think it was good.
the
That was
Judith
kind
deck.
that was kind of your
is
combo
really strong
finish,
as well.
though, basically.
Yeah, but you
that
need
was
that's
to
like
what
combo
control,
has
and then
to
you just
do.
comboed
Yeah.
off in one. Yeah.
But that's
I
how
mean,
control does
the
it,
thing
right?
here
Like
is
But then aren't you a
control
combo
is
deck? Like if you're
you're
combo
really a
killing,
combo.
or kind
I
of
mean,
a
if-
combo deck with a lot of rats.
control goes into essentially every one of these archetypes, right? Like mill is a bit of control, or control can be a bit of stacks, right? So there's control mill, control stacks. These are usually kind of the pieces that you just mesh together to make a strong control deck. Like Richard had mentioned, yeah, okay, and if you have 3 other opponents, you do need some little bits of light stacks to play pure control. And that's fine. I don't know. I mean, if you're Tomer, you're like playing tap out control, right? I think that all these archetypes of control work. It just comes down to a lot of the decisions that you make, right? It's just like any other format of control. You have to make very hard decisions every game. And even if it's a casual format, you have to make the hardest decisions. When to pull off a kill spell, when to pull off the board wipe, when to let what resolve, things like that. So it's the most punishing deck. These are the most punishing decks if you make the wrong decision.
I
fully
will say
agree.
in other formats, there's a point where you cannot beat control anymore. Like no matter what you draw or what you do, you cannot win. In Commander, that never happens, right? Like Commander is like
what?
you gain control for a couple turns and then you win the game. Whereas in like Modern or something, I can control you to the point where you can do whatever you want and like it's impossible for you to win now, right? So I think the absolute control versus temporary control is a difference between 60 card and Commander.
I think combo decks or control decks have to have a finisher that's very like a small package, right? Because most decks can't afford to run so much interaction to be called control. So then that means you are running like a 2-card combo. You are running a finisher. Like in Toshiro, for example, my main finisher is Torment of Hailfire. If I know there's blue at the table, I just tutor up my Cavern of Souls, or not Cavern of Souls, but Seiju before doing it, so I can't be countered. So I just ramp. Like I'm just ramping. I board wipe a couple times, and then eventually I win with just a big Haymaker spell. So like the finisher stuff is like very small. It's only like I only have like 5 cards that actually win me the game, and everything else is just interaction.
Everything else is control. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Burn. How do we feel about Burn? Krim. You are. I don't know that you actually play Burn. I guess you play a lot of Burn. I play a lot of Burn. Too.
I play
How do you feel
Burn.
about Burn?
I
We've averaged out to a
personally-
C in the group.
Okay, so we have Seth at B, Tomer at D. Or no, wait, hold on.
No,
Sorry,
that's
everyone's
no.
at C and I'm at a B.
Yeah.
Okay, so I personally think B, this could be up towards an A, but it's much like Mill. It's going to be annoying. It's going to hit everybody. And to be honest with you, most of the time, I don't like focusing down one person, although I should, right? It's not that I don't like it, I feel bad, so I let people live longer than they probably should, and I usually die because of that. So the main thing here is Burn is one of those archetypes where I think you have to, if you're playing this, you are semi-playing stacks, according to Seth. You are roiling vortexing, you're like sulfuric vortexing, you're doing all these things, and you're a lot of static effects. And then you're playing damage doublers. People will get very annoyed. They will kill you very quickly. You have no counter magic. But by the time it's all said and done, you're down to, everyone's down to like 20 life. Maybe like 15 to 20 life. I like this archetype. I think this archetype is very good. And if people don't respect the little pingers, the 1 damage, they will eventually die.
Do you consider that? Do the rest of you consider that a burn deck? I'm actually curious. Like, if your plan is like mana barbs and like roiling vortex and damage doublers, is that what Commander Burn is? Because I think of like throwing actual burn spells at opponent's face when I think of
no,
burn.
I think like for like the one that comes to mind immediately is like
Purphoros.
Purphoros. Yeah,
Purphoros.
that's like the de facto Purphoros. I feel like Burn is another problem where like you get a lot of like unnecessary hate because people see like your game plan's very obvious. It's like I'm gonna just burn you to death. So the best burn commanders and like the most popular ones I would say are ones that can affect the board at the same time, like Imodane, for example. You blow up a creature, so you're removing creatures that can attack you, and then you burn your opponent's faces. Or Torolf, for example, you put down Torolf, you do like a chain reaction or something, you blow up everybody's creatures and then you burn their faces off. Or Judith, same thing like that. Like burn can't just be like I lava axe you multiple times. I guess like you could, but then like you just have very angry people with armies that will swing at you and then you die. So you really need to you need to have like a two-pronged approach where you're dealing with your opponent's creatures and then also burning them to death, or at least having a lot of creatures to block with.
Burn is more of like in this format, just like how control has to be a little bit of light stacks. Burn is essentially going to should be and always be group slug, because there's no way I'm lightning bolting everyone every turn, right, and casting my mana and not running out of cards. So you have to get your damage across multiple players, and the only way you can do that is group slug.
Yeah, I think burn is actually really strong. I actually put it as a B. The problem with burn is you have to play half combo pieces. Like, you know, as soon as you put down that Perforos or you put down that damage doubler and then pass the turn, everyone's gonna murder you. But there are really efficient ways to just nuke everybody, right? Like you can just go insult to injury, price of progress, right? And like just like
Or
nuke
6
everyone
soil.
for like 30 or something for like 5 mana or something like that, right? So
Yeah.
it can get scary, but then it just draws a lot of hate. Like if you try to put a Perforos and pass the turn, even if you don't have the kill, everyone thinks you have the kill and they're gonna murder you. So that's what limits it. The good news is if you are good at sandbagging, your job gets a lot easier, right? If you're somehow still alive, everyone's at 10 life, then you're just like, well, let me untap and murder everyone instantly, right? So everyone's damage helps. So as long as you can disguise that you're burned, it's good. So like if you're playing like Boros or something and you're playing like weenie creatures, no one knows you're a burn deck until like turn 7, and then you like Perforos make make 8 tokens, kill everyone on the spot. Like that, I think is like super strong.
Is that burn, or is that not just a token, like a Perforos?
Well, that's a
deck, right?
I mean, Perforos is burn, right? I mean, it's a
Is
mix
it?
of burn / tokens, but
I think
that's
so.
a burn card, no?
I would say like even like Mogus, Torbrand, Zozu, right? Sulfum. These are burn commanders, right? And one that I really like from Duskmourn is Lord of Pain. So
that was
these
cool.
are burn decks. And it also specifically, I think Lord of Pain is exactly what you need because the can't gain life is built onto it. So I think these are more burn play styles, whereas what you're describing feels more like, believe it or not, more of a not even combo. Sorry, strong synergy decks.
I do
I
think
mean,
burn
if you
decks are
have
mostly
a propaganda
combo decks,
down
right?
and I don't need to attack you and I
Or-
reduce your life total to 0, that's burn, right?
It seems like Burn's
I
either combo or stacks, one or the, or like some sort of like stacks adjacent. Because Torbrand to me feels more like a stack than a burn deck, because you're just like putting down stacks pieces, right? Like that's the kind of the game plan. Isn't Torbrand you're just playing every enchantment that deals any amount of damage, and then like blood mooning or
And
whatever, and
Dragon's
just
Well,
waiting
depends
until
if you
you're
count
No,
the
no,
stacks or
no,
not.
no
If
need
you
to
deal
blood
1
moon.
damage during each upkeep, is that stacks?
Yeah, like I don't know. I feel like this is very clear. Like burn to me has always just been like an archetype that focuses on just dealing damage directly to my opponents.
Yeah,
you
don't need
know?
to attack.
Yeah.
Don't need to attack,
Yes.
essentially, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. These were the easy ones, and we are very happy here. How about Enchantress? Enchantress is a very easy one. You play lots of enchantments. There are cards called Enchantress, which when you play an enchantment, you draw a card. And then, you know, Gaia's Cradle. Well, there's one called Sarah Sanctum, which is a land that taps to add, you know, a mana for each enchantment you control. Enchantress, where do we all set it as A. Are we happy with it being very strong here?
it's
I think-
Yeah, it's pretty strong.
yeah, it's really good. Not quite as good as Artifacts. Like it has the mana advantage that Artifacts does, and it has really good card advantage, but I think it's a less resilient than Artifacts, I would say, overall. So
Yeah.
Oh.
It's way less resilient,
Plus
and
your
it
cards
usually
have
just spins
color.
its wheels.
Oh. I was
Yeah.
the exact opposite. I was like,
It's more
so
resilient, right?
I think Enchantress is much harder to actually deal with because there's just less colors that can deal with it. Like red can deal for Artifact. I get blown out by white, green, and red consistently. But when I'm playing Enchantress, red can't deal with it. Black, I know you hate that
No,
black has some
black's the
enchantment
best, the best
but
color
it's not
dealing
very
with it.
good. If I see somebody's playing mono black, I'm like, I'm not like, oh no, my big shrine deck is gonna die to it. It's like, okay, you'll blow up one of my shrines. Ooh. But like, yeah, I think it's more resilient. I think it's a lot slower though, because again, Artifact has all the fast mana option, all the Moxen, all the Sol Rings, all the Mana Crypts, those are all things that boost artifacts. And artifacts are mostly colorless. So if you have any colorless reducers to all your artifacts, which there's a whole bunch of, you can just start chaining them out. Whereas enchantments are almost always colored. And so I think it's just slower to deploy it, but I think it's more resilient. So I would put it a little bit lower than artifacts, but in the same tier, really.
So I would say that I think why I see enchantments is more resilient is less resilient is artifacts are, I think, much better at rebuilding. Like you have a lot of good cards that are like get an artifact back from your graveyard, get multiple artifacts. Like that's kind of artifacts gimmick, right? It's like very easy to loop things in and out of your graveyard. Enchantress is not as good at that, right? Like once your stuff gets dealt with, you can have like a replenish or something similar to how artifacts can have something like that, but you don't have all the like just random artifacts, the junk divers and all this stuff that's just like recurring your graveyard constantly.
I'd rather have the mass enchantment. There's
Yeah,
like,
I'd rather
there's like
just take the
4
whole
of them.
graveyard.
Yeah, I'd rather just take the whole graveyard and put it onto the battlefield.
But artifacts do that too.
There's like 5
but
of
they
those.
also get junk divers
artifacts
and mirror
do.
retrievers. Like they also get the mastery animation, and
Yes.
they get all these other heavily played cards that get stuff back from the graveyard.
But they get blown up.
Enchantments
Wow.
do all of that, like at Seth is mentioning, like at like maybe 4+ mana, but artifacts just have it every step of the way. Everything they do kind of essentially reoccurs it at all parts of the curve.
I mean, I would say they're both very strong, but the differentiating factor is that one, Enchantress decks all look the same. They run the same core engine of like Enchantress, right? And then so like if you have a Shrine deck versus a Sithis deck, whatever, they all kind of look the same. Whereas artifacts come in all shapes and colors, right? There's like the treasure deck, right? There's big mana decks, right? There's stuff like that. And then the other thing is artifacts have better fast mana. And I'm not just talking about like mana rocks, but things like Metal Worker, the artifact that like adds mana for each clue you have, right? So yes, while Enchantress has like Serra Sanctum, like artifacts have access to like 5 or 6 or 7 of these, like Forsaken Monument. Like there's all kinds of weird things you can do to get like super fast mana. But both very strong. Like I'm quivering in my boots if I see an Enchantress deck, right? Like if you take any deck and put the Enchantress engine on it, it becomes like pretty legit, pretty fast, right? So
We've seen some pretty janky Enchantress decks pop off on Clash.
Yeah.
We have like a janky theme, but the Enchantress engine, and it's still usually pretty good.
like drawing
Yeah.
50 is pretty good no matter, even if it's junk, right? Like bringing back your entire graveyard is pretty good, even if it's all jank, right? So yeah.
So if I play the new Amanatu, can I call it a Miracles deck, or do I have to disclose that it is an Enchantress deck?
It's of course an Enchantress deck.
I mean, most
Oh.
decks in reality are a combination of these archetypes, right? Like very
Yeah.
few decks are like purely one thing. Speaking of graveyard, like every deck probably has some graveyard synergies, right? But there are decks dedicated to the graveyard, like Muldrotha, right? That's like a value-y engine. Reanimator decks, where you try to dump something in and just get it out as fast as possible. How do we feel about graveyard decks?
Busted.
Dedicated to the grave could be a metal band.
It's really funny 'cause, like I feel like graveyard decks in certain metas might be like underpowered, honestly, and it really depends on how much graveyard hate you're running. Like I love graveyard decks. I usually love like artifact graveyard decks because I love artifacts, but I'm doing like graveyard things, and graveyards, like if they're popping off, you just have the graveyard. Your entire graveyard is just like a free extra hand that you have constantly throughout the game. But even better, because you can cheat stuff in without even casting them. There's so many cards that like reanimate or let you put stuff from the graveyard directly onto the battlefield for like almost no mana down. And that's amazing. So it's like really, really good when it's popping off. But if your opponents are actually running graveyard hate, it feels like you're running like half of a deck, Like most of your deck is not even functioning at that point. And it just really depends on the meta. But like I think most people are running like maybe one graveyard hate in their entire deck. Some of them are not running any. Like it's just like not happening, So I think on average it's more powerful than in your typical meta. It's much more powerful.
I think it's like one of the highest ceilings and lowest floor archetypes, but I don't think that many people actually play Graveyard Hate when it comes down. We always talk about playing Graveyard Hate, but when it actually comes down to like cutting a cool card from our deck to put in Graveyard Hate, it doesn't happen that often. So I think that Graveyard, if you don't get hated on, it's got to be like a high ARS tier archetype, right? Like if you just have free reign and didn't have to worry about getting hit by Graveyard Hate, you can do some incredibly strong stuff really quickly with your graveyard. So I think it's what Tomer said is mostly correct. Like if you actually have a play group where everyone's playing Graveyard Hate, then it is probably like C tier. But if it's our play group where you once in a while, every like couple of weeks, someone has a Graveyard Hate spell, I think it's like secretly a busted archetype and like arguably
Except
8
for
S
that
tier.
one time when they have a planar void, it's
Right.
the feeling
That
of
one
it.
time's gonna be rough. But
somebody Russ puts down
They
rest
start
in
the game with
peace,
the
and
late
they're
light
like,
before. What's going on? I would say it. Here's the time to bring up the quote. It's so good it's bad, right? Like I think
Oh,
it's
no.
an archetype that's self-policing, because if you just play it cutthroat, it's so good that you'll get shamed out of casual tables, right? Like you just go turn 1 Entomb, turn 2 Reanimate, Jin Gataxias. Everyone dead,
Yeah.
right? Like even if they have
Yep.
Graveyard, hate in their deck, but you're like, yo, bro, it's CDH, what are you doing, right? And then you get shamed out of the group, and then you play like some watered down version so that everyone is happy. So I think people don't play Graveyard decks as they should, because then it looks CDH, but it's not CDH. Like you do that at CDH table and you just get counterspell and you die, and like that's it, right? Like, but it's strong enough to pub stomp casuals that people don't do this, right? Because you can basically get any creature out for 1 or 2 mana in the game, and you can probably cripple the table quite easily. And people just don't do that because people get mad. So I think we self-select down the power, and then you end up with like this like lukewarm pile, and then it's still very strong. But I think if for whatever reason you weren't trying to control power level, or you weren't made to feel bad for winning and stuff like that, like this is one of the strongest things you could do, because you basically get to cheat out anything in the format. And who's going to have Graveyard Hate on turn 1? Like how many people are going to have Graveyard Hate that early? How many people are going to have a free counter spell to stop it, right? Like it's basically a Thoracle combo with not an immediate win, right?
I feel like even your average graveyard deck, like I've seen graveyard decks are very, very popular in my pods at least, and all of them are just very, very effective if you're not interacting with the graveyard. Like I saw Disa recently, I saw the Necrobloom a lot recently, and all these decks are just like, if you have an answer that isn't an exile effect on their permanents, they're just going to cast it again, right? It's just going to come back the next turn. Like a Marin, one of the most popular commanders of all time, is just like, yeah, okay, you killed my thing. Great. That's good for me, actually. I'm going to play it again next turn. Maybe I'll put it into play for free, actually. And then you just like, it can grind. It's so good at grinding out the table.
It's like
So
having a
it's so
30 card
resilient.
hand, but you can tutor while you're doing
Yeah.
this, right?
Yeah,
like
pretty much.
that extra resource. Which is why mill is not good, right? Because you're just drawing people cards if they're a graveyard deck. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
all right. How about Voltron? So Voltron, I guess encompasses any strategy where you try to load up a single creature for maximum damage, right? So typically a lot of equipments or auras, you make it into like a 10-10, I guess an 11-11 double striker to commander damage someone, stuff like that. So Arden is a very popular Arden and Rograk, one of my favorites. How do we feel about Voltron?
I think Voltron's really good. I think I'm the outlier here because I had it as like an A when Tomer had a B and the rest of you guys had C's. I think Voltron, if you look at Commander Clash games, I feel like Voltron has a pretty high success rate of actually like when someone brings a Voltron deck, either literally winning the game or at least putting up a really good showing before they end up just barely losing the game. So I think if you build
Do
with
you know
all
why
this,
that is?
why
Who's the last Voltron deck that did something useful?
That happens. That happens because everyone feels bad after beating up on the deck passively, and so that player lives long enough because they're like, "Well, we just have been like you've been catching strays all game because I Krim played one edict and you had a sack every turn." So I think Voltron is when it's performed well on Clash has usually been because it's like we have
pity.
allowed it to perform well.
Or just maybe a lack of interaction with the thing that's effective. Like Voltron decks are usually very hard to, like their whole point is to just kill you with your commander. Play your commander, beef the commander up, make your commander incredibly sticky onto the board, so it's very hard to target removal it. And then, but if you get rid of it, everything falls apart. You know, like
Yeah.
if you
Right.
force some sacrifice, you got an exile board wipe, you got to bounce like a Cyclonic Rift or something like that. The Voltron strategy is so far behind. And then at that point, it's the mercy of the table to allow it to come back into the game. And I think the other issue with the Voltron deck is that you can kill one person very effectively, but then everybody else is on super high alert, and they're going to do everything in their power. Like once you can kill somebody, you're yelling it at the table. You're like, "Hey, look at me! I can murder any of you if I untap. You gotta
But
deal
only
with me."
one.
But only one.
But only one of you.
And then you give the other two people another full turn cycle to figure something out in terms of how to deal with the Voltron character. Like Voltronites can be very powerful, but I feel like they're kind of handicapped in that you anger the rest of the table and everything hinges on this single creature going all the way. And if it gets dealt with, you're just like, oh, oops.
Or yeah, if you lose all your equipment and all of that, and like, or getting it all bounced, just the loss of tempo and mana, like, and having to resync the next like 15 turns to redeploy everything is so brutal.
You can reanimate it all and equip it for free. Like that's not the big deal. I think the big deal is
no.
you kill
How
one
often-
person a turn. That's the big deal, right? Like, and sure you can take extra combats, but now you have like an 8-card combo where you manage to suit up your commander for lethal. You manage to remove blockers. You manage to have protection, and you need the extra combats to try to kill people. Like it's just so much that needs to be put together that I feel this is bad. And then the minute you look scary, like the minute a hexproof card comes down or an indestructible card comes down, everybody's on high alert and they're trying to murder you. So I agree with Tomer. Like it's super sus. I think the last good Voltron deck was Benton, and Benton is just broken. Like that's the last time I remember.
Yeah, Benton, you don't bring out.
Benton is just
a
broken,
chill
right? Because
table.
he draws cards, so then you can just draw like all your interaction. But aside from that, I can't remember a Voltron deck doing anything on Clash in a very long time.
I think it's gotten so much better with all the like phase out effects. Like being able to protect your entire stack of stuff has gotten so much easier. Like arguably we got Voltron. I guess it didn't work out in the end because Mill is bad, but we got very close to getting double Voltron by Mindskinner of all things. Like
Wait,
like
Mill that is Voltron?
that's like the
That
most
was a
Voltron. That
Voltron
is
deck.
straight up a Voltron deck. Yeah, I
You had,
would
like,
consider
one
it straight up
champion on that
Voltron.
thing.
No, I was putting things
He was
on that
phasing
bad
it out
boy
and
for
countering
days.
it, and like, yeah, that to me that felt very much like a Voltron deck. And like, if it wasn't for Mill just being such a bad archetype that it can't,
No.
it can't
No,
stop
it
tripping
wasn't
over
for
its own feet,
commander
it would have won
damage.
both
If it
games.
wasn't for having
Voltron
the
is
land.
kill commander damage, not you mill people. What is that?
No. Don't
Technically it is
listen to
Voltron,
that.
but that's not
Okay, Tomer,
yeah,
I
I
want you to know I almost had them, but then they played that stupid phase out land.
Yeah,
That's a good plan.
I mean, you
Yeah,
almost had them, and then you
tailgates.
did it, and then you gave everyone a win con because you built the entire
Well,
graveyard
hey,
into the
you
library.
fly, you gotta reach for greatness, okay? And I tried.
All right, Tomer, I got one for
Oh.
you. Spellslinger with Nyth Visit. So Spellslinger, very broadly here, just things that require you to cast a lot of spells. So sometimes it requires you to cast a lot of spells all at once, like some kind of storm deck. Sometimes just like a spell every turn, maybe everyone's turn or your turn, second spell, things like that. How do we feel about Spellslinger? Oh, shockingly, Tomer has this lower than all of us.
I think Niv Mizzet is like S tier for Spellslinger. That's like saying like, okay, we're gonna look at artifacts instead of Urtet, we look at Urza, like the original Urza. It's like, yeah, of course, obviously busted. But I feel like you guys overrated a little bit. I think the best thing Spellslinger has going for it is that it's so hard to interact with because instant sorceries, very few people can actually mess with it really. Like you either need counter magic or you need like whites to be like silence, like you can't cast non-creature spells this turn, something like that. But the downside of it is it has like the worst board states out of most of these archetypes. Like Spellslinger can make board states with like these token generators, but like outside of like Young Pyromancer and Feldon in the third path, a lot of them just kind of suck. Like putting down Talrand, paying 4 mana for a Talrand, and then having to like make like 4 drakes after I cast 4 instants and sorceries. It's just bad. It feels bad. And then it's just like it's not good. So it's very easy to attack into. And then I think it's heavily reliant on like all the broken cards, like Jessica's Will and stuff that everybody's running to like generate the mana and everything. It's good, but it's like very vulnerable, I think, and a bit slower than the A's that I gave before.
But it also has the strengths of winning out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
Like an Underworld Breach win the game. right?
Yep.
You
But
only
that's
need
like Underworld Breach, though. That's not Spellslinger. That's just like I took a broken card.
But Spellslinger
every
gives you the
Spellslinger-
But it
graveyard and
typically
the
goes with the
spells in your
Spellslinger.
graveyard to like
Yeah.
just win when you resolve it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I could put that in any. I could put Underworld Breach in any red deck, and I'm just gonna win the game.
You can put
incidentally.
Mizzix's Mastery.
Mastery.
Yeah.
It's
That's a
like
good one.
the Jessica's Will, like the things that Spellslinger decks typically run. Yes, they're broken. So if you cut out all the broken cards, it does nothing. Yes, but like those go into almost any Spellslinger deck, and those like I would say are almost one card win cons, right? Like, when you Underworld Breach, yes, you're casting 10 other spells, but that breach like kind of gives you the win. Same with the Mastery. And I do like Spellslinger because it wins out of nowhere and it's hard to interact with. Like Trover said, like you have to not only run counter magic, but run like counter magic at the right time. You have to have it up. Like the minute you tap out, they can go for it. So it's difficult. And I agree that you have no board state, but that's why you play things like Spirited Companion and Solemn. Right? Like you create some kind of board
These
system,
are
you don't
more
instantly
board
shatter
wrecks.
to anything. And then you wait for turn 7 or 8, and then you do the thing. Right, but it's feast or famine a lot of times. Like a lot of people try to like go off on turn 4, or like they try to put down like their mana reducers, like Goblin Electromancer, Stormkill, Arcanist, whatever it is.
A lot of those-
They
I
put
feel
it too early, and then everyone removes it, and then they just die. Right, but if you just sandbag it to turn 8 and do it all at once, it's very hard to interact with. So I think it's pretty
Yeah.
strong.
I disassembled my Spellslinger deck and Myra deck just because like a lot of the cards just kind of sucked. Like I feel like Spellslingers, like the mana reducers things are kind of bad. The card draw options are fine, but yeah, I don't know. I rebuilt it. It's now much more powerful, but like it's because of the commanders a lot better. I feel like the archetype is kind of like but whatever. Maybe I'm biased. I am biased. I love this.
Okay. I think this is like probably the least played thing we've ever seen on Clash. +1/+1 counters. Like
Who wants to keep
people
track
love
of all that?
+1/+1 counters. It's one of the most popular things to do in Commander, but we tend to shy away from it. Where did we put this thing? We gave it
I
3
love that
C's
you
and a
put that
B.
over mill, and I have that as the worst archetype in Commander.
This is like if you want to build
I
a
mean, I
creature
don't
deck,
know
but
if
then
we
you
gotta
want to
pick.
build a bad creature deck, right? Like, is that not what +1/+1 counters is? Like, all right, we're gonna take these creatures that are kind of bad, but if you have +1/+1 counters on them, they get okay. But then it's like an extra step. You could have just played good creatures instead and played a creature deck, no?
But you get some unique
What's the
stuff.
payoff?
You get like Doubling Season as a busted card and like other effects that just like give you tons of counters to win the game. So I feel like there is like it's not a good archetype because like you said, like you have to be a creature deck, so you're still susceptible to all the wraths and all the creature interaction, which is rough for creature decks anyway. And you're a creature deck that has like an extra restriction on it where you can't play any good creature because you want your creatures to involve +1/+1 counters. But I do think there are like meaningful payoffs once you start like dropping the doubling season or the foreign collection. You can't have really big turns and like just overwhelm and win the game. So I don't think it's horrible. It's definitely not mill level. Like it can't be mill level. There's no way.
Well, it's not actively helping your opponent. So of course, it's not as bad as mill.
It's a lot of work for like no real payoff, right? Like you need a lot of you need like the +1/+1 synergy piece. You need creatures, and then you do it, and you're like, what happened? Like I don't know, I drew 2 cards.
Your
or something,
creature's
right?
slightly
it's like
bigger, yes.
it's not like anything good happened. It
Yeah.
has the benefit. I said this before, but as you put +1/+1 counters on your creatures, you're not worrying about helping your opponents out, right? So I do give it that above mill, and people can help you out, right, by sustaining damage so that your 3/3 actually shambles in there and kills people. But there are strong +1/+1 counter decks, right? Like if you just think of like the staple cards, like Avenger of Zendikar. That thing will just kill you by itself, right?
Forgotten
Like,
Ancient also just wins by itself because it's so big.
So there are some strong things in here, but in general, it's kind of meh. Krim, would you like to present any argument for mill over +1/+1 counters?
I think that no matter what I say, I'm overruled by the committee, so it doesn't matter.
Mr. Mime, do you have anything to add?
He is also overruled because it's 3v2.
Oh,
You
there's
can't
no stack
point.
the numbers. We're smart.
It's
It's
like not
simple
allowed
as
to
this.
speak.
If you like, at some point, your mind's eye will open, and when it does, you'll understand. Until then,
Inside.
Have fun.
Okay, don't worry. I got another contender to help out Mill. Chaos. Now, I think
Oh.
Tomer might actually put Mill above Chaos here. I'm going to slam it into C. Any arguments for Chaos? So Chaos can be anything from random decks, where you just mess with people, and therefore Tomer would argue you have no win con and you're just doing random stuff. It could be coin flip decks where you take a random deck and then try to remove all randomness out of it by flipping coins like multiple times. Any thoughts on Chaos decks? Do we like Chaos decks at all?
So as far as being competitive, they're just not, right? Is that even the goal of a Chaos deck, though? If you're building a Chaos deck, I don't even think you're trying to win. You're like playing it for a very different reason, which is just to like have fun. So I think by what
it
it's trying to
fun?
do, it's actually
By
like
fun or annoy
successful at
people?
it, right? Like, well, yeah, I mean,
Both.
for some people,
I love
annoying
I think
people is how
Winter
they have
Orbit's
fun.
fun. Is that great? Is that great for people? If I just drop turn one,
But like, if you're
Winter
trying to
Orb?
win a pod, you're not going to play Chaos, right? That's just not going to happen. So
Well,
I
it
think
depends,
by
Seth.
power levels, it's not. It's definitely a C tier archetype, but I think it's actually there's a reason to play it, which is just to like troll everyone and have a good time.
I think it's stronger than Mill, because if you cast Scrambleverse against me, I'm just gonna concede. So like you gotta win. I'm gonna concede and not play anymore. So that I think it's stronger than Mill there.
What's the next Anything Goes episode, by the way? Curious.
Oh god.
I got you, Krim. I think Mill is stronger than Chaos. like Mill has an actual win con, right? And if uninterrupted, I can actually win a game with Mill. Whereas Chaos, like, it is very difficult to. It's like you assemble like a 4-card combo to try to win the game, but in the meantime, your things are just doing random things. So it's very difficult. So I would put Mill above Chaos, actually.
Probably true.
I wouldn't put coin flips with Chaos though, because if we're looking at coin flips by itself, I rate it an A. I think I haven't seen a coin flip deck that isn't like enemy number one at a table. Like if you show me Okon and Zinder Split, I'm like, okay, Okon's gonna one-shot me the moment it's actually cast. I need to deal with this person immediately. They don't even need Krarkstrom at this point. Like there's so many busted coin flip cards at this point that you just play your two commanders. Okon becomes like a 15,000 power creature. You give it evasion and you just start doming people one by one while you draw a billion cards. Like coin flips are so pushed now. It's ridiculous a little bit.
I can see that. How about, okay, Krim? This is every deck you play. Stax. Where would you put Stax, Krim? Where would you put Stax?
Where would I put Stax?
So Derevi is a classic Stax commander where you basically prevent everyone's lands from untapping, but you can untap yours. Like Urza is a thing, or like maybe Turgrid. These are classic Stax commanders, which typically are frowned upon in casual, so you may not see them. But once in a while, someone might break out the light Stax or the fair Stax or something. But essentially, they try to prevent you from playing the game if they're successful.
So every Crim deck.
So first off, that's a nice bait, Richard. I don't play Stax, so I don't know. Second off, I mean, I perfectly think this deck is fine. And I think it's a strong, solid like B to an A. I don't think it's actually that powerful if you're just going full stacks, because full stacks itself just kind of does nothing and it has a bunch of 1/3s. Right? And like 1/3s, 2/2s. Like the light stacks is better actually because I think that light stacks comes with bodies, whereas full stacks is just enchantments that do nothing. They don't hit anybody, right? Like we're talking about like the literal smoke stack, things like that. Those decks make you sack a bunch of stuff. It takes forever. It gives people a lot of time to assemble, like to get back in the game, because you take a while assembling every stacks piece. I actually prefer light stacks, hate bears over this archetype because those can attack.
Random magistrates and stuff.
Yeah, like
gotta
those
tweak.
actually can end a game much faster because the main stacks archetype does nothing, actually does nothing, and it gives people so much time. So whereas the other one, the light stacks, kind of like delays people's game plan just long enough for you to get your aggression out onto the board. And when I say aggression, yes, I do mean the 2/2s.
I feel like I feel like Stax should be like S tier, A tier, but it's not because of the unwritten rules of Commander that don't let us play the best Stax cards. If you really could just like play all the unbanned cards and make the best Stax deck possible, I think your win rate would be really good. But we're nice people usually, so we're not allowed to play all those cards. So Stax kind of sucks.
I think Stax is actually kind of underpowered. Like
Really?
I look at CDH and like there are Stax decks in CDH, but they're all awful because the only thing that Stax does is it kind of like unites the table to be pissed off at you, and you usually don't have like a fast way to win the game immediately afterwards. So what happens is like your Stax piece gets dismantled at instant speed, and then somebody combos off and wins. And I feel like that obviously that doesn't really happen in casual because nobody's going to be like, okay, I untap, I combo off, I win with my Thoracle. But I think it's like a similar idea where like you drop a Stax piece, everybody's pissed off at you. Eventually that Stax piece gets removed because you're not winning super fast afterwards. And then people just gang up on you as long as the Stax pieces are off the table. So I think like if you play Derevi, like I think you're just gonna stomp the table because Derevi is very good, not because the Stax pieces are very good in general. So yeah, I think it's actually kind of a weak strategy in Commander, just because for example, I took out Dranith Magistrates from all my decks because not because I think it's like a mean card, it's because I just felt it actually lowered my win percentage because like I would just annoy people and then eventually it would get removed and everybody would gang up on me, and then the person with the broken commander just plays the commander and wins. And I'm like, oh, okay.
But
cool.
are you playing like Linger Orb and Stasis and Static, or like are you playing like
I think they're all
hardcore? Really interesting.
They're all
I think
pretty
those cards
bad.
are bad.
It's
Yeah.
like control,
Annoy
where it's
people.
hard to stacks everyone out of the table, and then once they know you're playing stacks, something slips through, you're dead. And I would argue that if you take any CDH deck and put it in a casual pod, it will stomp, except for stacks. Right? So if you take like any kind of Thoracle Storm looking deck and you bring it to a casual pot, you'll just pub stomp them, right? You take a CDH stacks deck, it might have a hard time. Like I don't know, right?
True.
Like because sometimes your stacks
Result
piece
will be
doesn't line. You put a Trinisphere down, they're like, okay, well, all my cards are 3+ mana
Yep.
anyway, right? And then you slap down a
It's
6/6, and you're like, uh-oh, right? What do I do about this thing, right? So
It's like how old Modern was when I would just bring standard cards into Old Modern, right? It's just like, oh crap, how do I just beat a 6 mana 5/6?
The Nick Fit theory.
and something slips through. Like you have to exert total control, and you need to win like instantly, right? Like it's hard to keep locking them down forever. And then also some decks are just you put a Blood Moon down, it's like a mono white deck over there. Like, okay, cool, bro. And then they're just like doing their thing, right?
And then there's like
Yeah,
one
it
person
is
pissed
matchup
off at you,
dependent.
but then it gets disenchanted, and that person's like, I don't care, the other person's about to win.
Yeah, they let the other person
You're
win.
going down.
Yep.
Yeah,
Like the blood
it's
moon's
like
already
locking
gone.
out
It's like,
the
you're
other
going
person.
down. I was like, okay, well,
Tokens. How do we feel about tokens? So things that spew tokens onto the battlefield. Maybe you have a doubling season. I guess we're not counting treasures or foods because they're artifact decks. But I don't know. Maybe you want to count them.
No.
Do you want to count them? I don't know. But
I think treasures
typically-
and food decks are like all creature decks now. Like Lonus doesn't play that many artifacts; it just plays a bunch of creatures and then it makes a bunch.
yeah, I guess that's true.
The tokens
Okay,
are
so what-
artifacts, though. I mean, tokens are fine. There's good payoffs for tokens. There's a lot of like rewards for playing tokens, but still when it comes down to it, you're just a deck that's like spewing a bunch of bodies on the battlefield. So I feel like that kind of caps how strong a commander deck can be. Like if your main game plan is just like, I'm gonna make a whole bunch of bodies and eventually like have them lose summoning sickness and attack you, I feel like that's like kind of a hard cap on how strong you can be. So I have it as a B tier. If we're throwing treasures and food in there and offering more like combo kills, it probably bumps up towards like a little more towards an A than a B, somewhere in between there. But I think it's like high average.
I think it's like +1/+1 counters, except it just has way better payoffs.
Yeah.
Like if you're like any sort of artifact, clue, whatever thing, and then you just like jam an Academy Manufacturer, everybody's like, well,
Mhm.
does anybody have an answer for the Academy Manufacturer? Nope. Okay, well, guess we lose. And there's like so many like white cards these days. It's like whenever you like sneeze and there's a token on the battlefield, you draw like 5 cards. It's like, yeah, okay, cool. I like this. That's like +1/+1 counters don't get that stuff, and it's like more variety. So I think it's significantly better than +1/+1. But still, you have to like
I'd
set
agree
up
with
and
that.
everything, you know.
It is better than 1/1 counters by a landslide, and that's just because your 1/1 counter creatures you care about, the tokens, they usually come off of something that's like, just generating them, right? They're kind of just like blank creatures that you don't care about. So I think tokens, if you get swept, you're like, okay, cool. This thing will just generate tokens again at the beginning of my next turn. Okay, go.
Yeah, I think so there are token decks that suck. So if your goal is to make tokens, triple them, untap, overrun, and win, that's like okay, right? But that's like a creature deck. That's not that's not what we're really scared of. What you're really scared of is like Perforos into 10 tokens, you dead, right? Or like Lonus into like a million clues, you dead, right? So tokens are usually supplemented with something else, and then that usually makes it like very strong. But if you're just like, here's some bunnies, I triple the bunnies, and then let me untap and let me overrun you, then that's like, okay, that's just like creatures that are kind of weak. But even then, it's still not bad because you have like Benny Brax, you have token triplers, you have, doubling season, stuff like that.
Yeah, at least there's
But
payoff.
it's really the combination with the other strategies that make it really strong.
I'm much more afraid of token decks that are not creature token decks, because then it's like, okay, I board wipe the creatures, but then you have all these other nonsense things on the battlefield still.
All the
It's gotta be
treasures
better than
and so
Stax
forth.
and Voltron, right? We'll put it
It's
somewhere
probably
in this
it's probably
upper
I'd put it at the
echelon
top
here.
of B, somewhere at the top of
Okay, we're gonna put it at the
Valley.
top. Okay.
I respect
There's no
Narnia's-
way.
I respect
There's
Phil's
no way
Narnia's style
this
Guardian.
burn and control slander right here. Tokens is beating that.
We're just gonna put Krim in the seat here. This is the anti.
Yeah, put all my decks into the seat here.
Put all your
No,
decks.
I'm
I
still
don't-
team. I'm still
I don't know what
team
magic
Controller.
y'all are playing, but like, geez.
Okay. How about lands? What do we feel
Oh.
about lands?
Here we
Let me
go.
just position
That's,
this here.
that's another S.
Oh, imagine.
No, that's the only S I gave. This is the
Tomer's
top
only
one.
S.
Only
Tomer's
S. This is the best archetype in my opinion in casual commander.
It's
I
the
mean,
only
imagine-
quad S we have here on our list.
I mean, we're playing Magic. You have to play 40 lands in your deck. Imagine if your deck actually got value out of all of those cards that you have to play instead of just having to play them to cast your spells. Like, I think that's what makes lands so broken, right? Everyone else has to play all these lands, but they're just these boring cards that let you cast your other spells. When if you're in a lands deck, those are actually like the main synergy pieces in your deck, which is just ridiculously powerful.
You also
I
can't
think-
interact with them.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yep.
because or else people
That's
are going to
also
be
key.
angry.
That's like, I think this is the biggest design mistake, is like everybody else is like having to card draw and ramp, and then land decks are just like, well, what if you did this basic thing in Magic everybody's doing and we rewarded you by drawing lots more cards off it? And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Why? No, make me work for it. And then like Krim said, is like, this is the only archetype where you basically have almost no ways of interacting with it. This is why like artifact decks I think are faster than land decks. They have much more explosive options, but land decks are like almost as fast. And the difference between artifact decks and land decks is my artifacts are getting blown up. Whose lands are getting blown up? Oh, I blow up one of your lands. Good thing the land deck is a graveyard deck as well, so they have 50 different Crucible world effects. So it's like, oh, you blew up my Field of Dead. Oh, woe is me. What will I do? Oh, I just play from the graveyard again, and then I
That's
play
an
5
extra
more
landfall
lands.
trigger. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's an extra landfall
You
trigger.
have-
The biggest problem is, so we talk about deck strategies, right? Like, you're like, oh, you got to assemble this 3-card combo. The one thing that's implicit is like, you need to make your land drops, right? And a lot of times you just lose the game because your deck fails you, right? You're like, I'm stuck on 2 lands. I have my +1/+1 counter combo all in hand, but I'm stuck on 2 lands. I just fall over and die. The lands are part of your strategy, right? So you are able to tutor them up. You're able to make your land drops while furthering your game plan. And also the no hate thing is big, because if you're like, well, we just Armageddon. Like, the lands
Yeah.
player is probably the player that like rebuilds the quickest out of everyone, right? Because their deck is all lands. They have ways to recur. So the hate isn't even effective against them. So I agree with Tomer. Lands are the biggest mistake, and I don't know why Wizards keeps printing more powerful lands and stuff like that. Like, just go back to the old days where a land just tapped for mana and that's all it did, right? Like, everyone just plays plains and islands and call it a day, rather than it makes a 2/2, draws a card, comes back from the graveyard, triggers 8 things, right? Like, it's
Because people like
It's
them.
free. It can't be
Honestly-
counterspelled. You can't counter a land drop.
Like, I think I agree with Richard to some extent, but I would say I would rather see them redo some of the payoffs too. Like, I think that's a easier fix. Like, you just don't need like Teyovas and these cards that just reward you for doing the thing your deck was going to do anyway. So I would like minimize those kind of cards, but lands are busted.
Okay.
Krim, what do you think about lands?
How do you feel about
I
I've
don't
never
really-
heard Krim's opinion on lands.
I don't think I need to say much about lands, only because I despise ramp. I despise everything that lands does. I despise lands on the same level. I think both lands and artifacts are equally annoying. So these are like my only two S's because I despise these two artifacts. I mean, these archetypes.
If there's a
So
lands player and an artifact player at the table, Krim, who do you go for first?
I concede.
What if there's artifact lands involved?
Oh God, I still concede. I just go home. Why would I play that? What do you?
you always go for the lands player because there's counterplay to artifacts, right? Like
Yeah.
a farewell could save you at some point. There is no saving you from the guy with 20 mana, right? And a land engine, right? Like every card he draws is lives. Like land, okay, cool, trigger all my effects, right? Spell, don't worry, it's a spell. I'll just do the thing, right?
Just kill them.
And-
Oh, I instant speed tutor up my Glacial Chasm. I can't be damaged.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to blow up my Glacial Chasm? Cool. I have a Crucible of Worlds. I'll replay it. Good.
Believe it or not,
Very nice.
I would mill them.
The solution to the land
That's
meta.
true. Land decks are kind of slow at actually winning the game, I find, historically.
Like Glacial Chasm, cool.
That actually might be the way you mill them.
I mean, it's the right thing to do. You just kill him first, right? But then you're like,
Yeah.
oh,
But then they're also graveyard decks too. So you're like, oh, all of these lands are in my graveyard. Splendid
Yeah.
Reclamation. Put all lands onto the battlefield. 50 landfall triggers.
all right. Blink decks. These kind of decks typically play creatures that have triggers when they enter, and then ways to double them, and then ways to blink, which is exile them and return them to the battlefield, and then their ETB trigger happens again. You get value. Brago, King Eternal, is the OG. How do we
Seth
feel
had a
about
Brago deck. I gave
Yeah.
Seth a Brago
How
deck.
do we feel
I
about
like
Blink
that.
decks?
Tomer gave
What do
me
you think
Brago
about
deck,
that?
and it was so busted. I ended up turning into 2 different monocolor decks because I felt bad that it was just so strong. I think blinking is in casual a very, very strong archetype. Like your creatures can do everything. You can reuse them a bunch of times. You naturally can protect your board by these mass blink effects that can like fizzle wrath essentially by blinking your team out for a turn. And once you get going, you get to the point where the value just becomes kind of overwhelming, and it feels like you can't lose once you get to that point. If they have a weakness, I think blink decks are like can be pretty slow and like difficult to set up sometimes. So I think if you can be aggressive against the blink deck, you can slow them down. I don't think because of the slowness of it, they can't be on the same tier as like artifacts or lands, but I think they're like a solid A tier archetype. Like it's inevitable once you get going, but a little bit slow to get there to begin with.
I move it into the high B because it's slow in that, yes, they'll get a lot of card advantage, but at the end of the day, it's a 2-2. Whatever they're drawing is more 2-2s. And
Yeah, but then you have like the easy infinite combos with like Peregrine Drake, and then someone's gonna play that, and then they're just gonna like
Sure.
win the game.
yeah,
Or they do like your Ryan restoration loops where they bounce their entire board, every single person's
every
step
turn,
or whatever.
yeah,
And then like,
But
oh,
the-
you have to stick down a creature to attack them with. It's like I play the ETB creature that bounces. There's like 50 of them. And so I
Yeah.
bounce a creature every single turn cycle. Every
But I
single
mean, they
person's
have
turn.
to have those exact loops to go, right? Otherwise, it is just an army of 2-2s. Like, yes, you were talking about 2 cards that can show up, but 8 out of the 10 times I've played these decks, it's mostly just, all right, I'm going to keep blinking. Okay, yeah. Like, it's a long time, and they're just going to slowly keep drawing 2 cards. And they don't really attack. So if everyone just beats them into oblivion and doesn't let up, I think that's the way to go.
I think it's hard to get the people to attack the blink player though. Historically, I'm always like, if they set up, it's going to be impossible to actually deal with them. But a lot of people are like, oh, he's playing a Mole Drifter. Who cares? Oh, he blinked the Mole Drifter. Who cares? But it's like, really, it's a ticking time bomb, right? As soon as they have enough mana and their engines are all online, you cannot deal with it because also blink decks are really extra resilient because a lot of their best cards to blink to reuse their value are things that dodge like instant speed removal, board wipes, like an eerie interlude, stuff that like mass exiles everything and returns at the end of turn. Like once they have a full grip, a bunch of lands and like a bunch of engine pieces on the battlefield, you cannot interact with them really. So I think it's like very inevitable, but it's like very slow. So people are like, I don't need to attack this person. Why should I attack this person? Not very scary. Just has a bunch of 2/2s. And then you just die to those 2/2s very slowly with a plonked on the head every single turn for 4 damage until you die.
I actually put Blink as S, and then I think Krim put it at B, but then the Seth and Tona put it at A. But I think this is the casual pub stomper. Like, it is so inevitable and consistent, right? And the only way you lose is due to like some kind of fast combo, but we've like shamed everyone out of playing that, so it's fine, right? Because it's like, it's the ultimate fair deck, right? Like, everything you play gets value. If you ever draw one of your combo pieces, you draw like 7 cards for fun. And then if you somehow get board wipes, you can just reanimate it all and then get like another 10 cards in hand on top of the full board. And then as you're drawing all these cards, you're probably drawing like counter magic, like interaction, right? So the only real way to beat this deck is to kill them before they set up, right? And that probably isn't creature combat because you have so many dirtles coming into the battlefield to block for you. What that really means, it's like a fast combo. But then we look down upon that in casual. So then you just win by default, right? So I feel that's just like the Blink advantage here.
I think it's actually pretty easy to, like, I think there's a lot of merit to just attack them when they have a bunch of Dirtles, because they want those Dirtles around to blink them. So if, like, Seth has a Muldrifter and, like, I'm not going to attack his little chump of Muldrifter, it's like, good. I want you to lose your Muldrifter so you can't blink your stupid Muldrifter, you know? I think it's actually very correct to, but no one ever does set up,
right? Like, if you arch enemy them, obviously you can kill them. But if I have a Spirited Companion and then Seth throws down a Perforos, who are you going to target, right?
Yeah,
you're going to immediately go for the Perforos player and then leave the Spirited Companion alone, right? Like, that's kind of the problem. It looks so unassuming.
It doesn't,
right?
Yeah, it doesn't look scary until it's too late. By the time you realize, especially if you're not used to playing against it, by the time you see, like, oh my god, they're going to, like, lock me out of the game, it's just too late to interact with.
And it's usually correct to focus on the Perforos player too, right? Like, they're going to kill you faster. So it's like,
kill you faster, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, it's not even wrong to not focus on the Blink player sometimes. But like, that's how you beat them, is they're very slow.
All right. Soul Sisters, Lifegain. How do we feel about Lifegain decks? So Aloro. So typically, these decks gain life, and then there's some payoff for gaining life. So there's like a bunch of cards that just win the game for existing at over 40 life.
Feldar's Sovereign and stuff.
That's hilarious.
Richard, there's one thing you should know. You never talk about on the internet. Taylor Swift, BTS, and Lifegain decks. There are so many Lifegain decks.
Let's get on this list.
I just, you know what?
We've already been flagged for mentioning Taylor Swift and BTS. Thanks, Krim.
I don't know.
We love Taylor Swift and BTS.
And Johnny's Pride Mate is like the poster child, right? So that's a card that gives +1/+1 counters when you gain life. +1/+1 counters and Lifegain are 2 of the most popular casual archetypes for some reason.
It's true.
Why? Why does everyone love Lifegain, and why can't we talk
It's really
about
good
Lifegain?
in Commander. It
good
is good
across.
in Commander.
It's popular across the board, right? It's popular in 60 card. It's popular in Commander. It's so popular. Everybody. What's the first thing they did when they got into Magic? Right? Oh, you start at 20 life. What if I could keep doubling that?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
but then you'll never die, right? So it's good.
I think people are used to sports where whoever's ahead on the scoreboard is winning, and they just like transfer that to Magic, and they think, well, if I can gain life, I'm like winning. And when really that's not how Magic works.
It's
Lifegain, the
MMO player, big number go up, right? Number go up, very good, right? Like,
okay, that's BS.
Like
no one plays White Mage in MMOs. Everyone plays DPS. Nobody's played Lifegain at all.
I think the biggest thing Lifegain has going for it is the win the game cards. Like, you get those easy, like, Felidar Sovereign, Test of Endurance cards. Like, those actually give it, like, a combo kill. But if your plan is just to gain life, I think your deck is kind of medium. Like, if you're trying to Johnny Pride Mate me or whatever, like, add counters whenever I gain life, not especially scared. Gaining life is very good, but Lifegain decks, I think, are B tier.
I think Commander has so many good payoffs for Lifegain though that I think it's a legitimate strategy. Like for example, we did the 1K life episode, right? And I was playing Shauna. And it's just like I gain life, I draw a whole bunch of cards. Or I played an Archangel Thune, which is an Ajani's Pride Mate, but for all of your creatures. So it's like, oh, I gain life, all my creatures get +1/+1, you know? And then there's like stuff that's like whenever you gain life, your opponents lose that much life. Phil was playing Will, Scion of Peace, which is like insane ramp. So I think life game by itself is like not very exciting, but I think Commander has a lot of good payoffs to it to elevate the archetype.
There's a lot of combos in Lifegain, right? There's straight up like Felidar Sovereign, the one that just wins the game, right? But then there's things like Heliod Walking Ballista, right? You win the game, right? Or there's the Sanguine Bond, whatever, Exquisite Blood combo, right? Like there's a bunch of Lifegain combos, but then there's also like the fair things like Oscillate Pride, right? Like that's insanely strong. We talk about card draw, Well of Lost Dreams, where you pay X anytime you gain X life, or up to X, I think, and you can draw that many cards, right? Like you just draw infinite cards. And then Lifegain has the advantage of like you are like insulated against dying. Right?
Yeah,
like it's
that.
some kind of like built-in defense. Like once you've gained 40 life, everyone's like, well, I give up on you. I'm not gonna
What's
hit
the
you. I'm gonna
point?
hit this guy at 20 life. He seems like he's gonna die soon, right?
You know the bell curve meme where it's like people are like the noobs, they think like, oh, Lifegain is good, and then in the middle is being like, Lifegain's bad actually. It doesn't progress your board state. And then at the end of it, the enlightened person is like, Lifegain is good. It's like, yeah, I actually like having 40 extra life, you know, and not being dead. And then the fact that the payoffs are so good, I think makes the archetype pretty decent.
Where would you
Right,
rank
it's got to
it,
be better than Stax and Voltron, right?
I think it's better
Maybe
than
even
Burn.
better than
That's
Burn.
better than Burn. It might be
Maybe behind
around
Tokens.
here.
somewhere.
I think it's better than Lifegain.
Somewhere
I
around
mean,
there.
Lifegain is better than Tokens.
Better than Tokens.
Oh,
I
then we
think
got
it's
to
better
jump
than
control and go all the way to the top.
Better than
Control.
better than,
No,
like,
the reason
better
why
than,
it
like,
doesn't jump control is because control literally doesn't care how much life you have.
Yeah, control doesn't care.
Until you Cavern of Souls down that Felidar Sovereign.
Yeah.
Be like, yo, bro, phase out. What's up? To fairies, bro. All right. Sacrifice decks. Now, I'm gonna have to iterate that it's the average sacrifice deck. So Corvold is the poster child of sacrifice. Insanely broken.
It's insane, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But there are other sacrifice decks, right? The sacrifice engines
There are.
usually involve some sack outlet to sacrifice creatures or something, and then when they die, something good happens, like a Blood Artist effect or Zulaport Cutthroat, where everyone loses a life, you gain a life, or maybe in the case of Corvold, you draw cards, things like that. How do we feel about sacrifice decks?
I think this is one of the most powerful, if not the most, like, without obviously beating lands and artifacts. I think this is probably ahead of that. It's ahead of Enchantress to me, because this is one of those ones, much like you talk about Blink, where, okay, most people won't think too much about it because you're playing a bunch of like 2/2s, right? This deck is a bunch of 1/1s, but the difference here is even if they acknowledge you, you can win out of nowhere because you have so many combos that require like 2 cards, maybe even 3 cards, right?
Yeah.
And you don't care if your stuff dies. That's great news. You prefer that they die. And like you have so many infinite loops that generate infinite mana that also every piece of this combo, let's call it 3 cards. Every card in this combo doesn't cost more than like 3 mana. So I think this is a very efficient archetype. And usually there's so many ways to refill your hand. The only thing that you have to just pretty much prepare for and hate out are like Kalidas and Rest in Peace. Like effects like that. But I think for the most part, this is one of the most powerful archetypes in Casual.
I think I bumped it. I was at a B. I'm kind of at an A after Krim said that, but I feel like there are some issues with it. Like I think the positive end is yes, like if you sacrifice a bunch of stuff, then you're going to be drawing cards. It also has like really good interaction options. Like there's the Grave Pact effects. There's also like the Fleshbag Marauders and stuff. These are all just staples in a sacrifice deck. So, and also there's like a bunch of other versions that like deal with disenchants and stuff. There's a lot of creatures that want to be sacrificed, and when they do, they interact with your opponents very, very well. So you can load up with interaction while furthering your game plan, which is really nice. There's a lot of combos, but I don't know. It's also, you have to focus on a lot of creatures and then having them sacrifice. Like it kind of runs into like the token issue where it's like if you get board wiped, yeah, I get pinged for 5 or something, but then you still have to rebuild your board. I don't know.
Not hard.
I
That's
feel
like
like
not hard at all.
I feel like the combos and just like the power of cards like Ashnod's Altar just make up for that. It's so easy to, if things go wrong and you get your board wrath, that's a bummer. But you don't need that much reassembly. If you're playing a token deck or something or a counter deck, you're probably going to need many creatures back on the battlefield to legitimately threat winning the game. But with a sack deck, you only need a couple of pieces if they're the right ones to just like combo off and get everyone. So I feel like it's an incredibly strong archetype, even discounting like the strongest version of it. There's just so many effects that trigger on creatures dying. So it's a very easy way to generate value.
So I think it's firmly an A. I do like that you are wrath proof. Like kind of like if you get so to some extent, right? If you get wrath, you're kind of helping your game plan, but at the same time, you kind of lost your engine pieces. I would actually put it at the bottom of A because I don't think it draws cards or recurs
What?
in the same
No.
way as these other decks. Like, okay, if you have Corvold, yes, you draw tons
No,
of
I'm
cards,
not
but if
even
you
talking
don't have
about
Corvold,
If you have like braids, or if you have like the Midnight Reaper, that's like whenever a creature
There's a
dies,
lot of
draw
when a
cards,
creature
like
dies,
Rin
draw.
Power
Yeah.
Specs.
but is it the same
Ayara.
level as Enchantress, Graveyard, and Blink? Maybe
I think it's
Spellslinger's the
lower
odd
than
one out.
I would say it's even
Enchantress.
easier, right? Because
I think
all
Really?
you
it's
need
lower
is
than
that one effect,
Enchantress.
and then you just start pooping out little like ones that you don't really care about. Whereas like
Well-
enchantments are like slow, clunky, one a turn, right? Like I could go play Midnight Reaper and then drop like 3 1-drops that like a little aristocrat creature.
But if you don't have Midnight Reaper,
Yeah.
But there's
how
so
many
many
draw engines
Midnight
are there in
Reapers.
Sacrifice? Are there?
You have
There's
yeah,
like,
you even have
there's
like,
several.
Okay.
I-
you can go to
I would
feel like
specialist.
it's good.
You have like, you know what I mean? You have all sorts of things. And then you have all the powerful free sack outlets and like Warren Soul Trader and then like heaven forbid you get like Mayhem Devil and you ping everybody down. But you have so many things that happen when creatures die, like Pitiless Plunder. It's not hard. It's really not that hard to get
Yeah.
these pieces going.
I
But
feel like
I
it's
feel
got to
like-
be
I
by
feel like-
graveyard somewhere. Because, like, it's
Yeah.
soft to the same stuff, right? I don't think Enchantress. I feel like I'd play Enchantress above it, personally. Because I feel like you're still soft to the same graveyard hate, which also sometimes shuts down your death triggers, shuts down your recursion. So I would put it somewhere in the middle of A. But sorry, Tomer, what were you going to say?
I think it's also soft to creature board wipes. Like yes, your stuff wants to die, but you want to be in control of when they're dying, and like the board wipe that you want to actually resolve is the one that you cast when you know you have enough like Blood Artist effects that will just win you the game. Like if you're like just setting up a Blood Artist and you have your sacrifice engine that draws you a card like a Yara, and then you have like some sacrifice fodder, being board wiped is actually really bad for you because like you didn't want to lose your Yara, you didn't want to lose your Blood Artist yet. So that's why I think like
But the
it's
thing
weaker than
is-
Enchantress.
It's so easy to just bring all of it back, right? They're also because the thing about Sacrifice is that they are essentially 3 archetypes. They are the Sacrifice, but they're also a graveyard deck, right? And then they like maybe they have like some other, if you want to consider it burn, if you will, but like they can drain you. There's so much versatility in like this deck, and I think that's what makes it so good. It may not be like the front runner of a I don't know, a graveyard deck, but it is a graveyard deck. It's a powerful, versatile tool, and that is why I really think that this archetype is so strong, because it can do whatever it wants, and it does all of it fairly well enough.
All right. So we'll leave it here. I'm going to move Blink ahead of Spellslinger.
Yeah,
I'm just going to
yeah.
do that. But I would say that if it's not Corvold, I actually don't care about Sacrifice. Like, I would put it in D. I'm like, if I don't see the Corvold there, like, if you just go Blood Artist pass, I'm like, whatever, dude. But if you're like Purple's pass, I'm like quaking in my boots, right? So, like, it takes them a while to set up. And I feel that they don't have the same inevitability as like Enchantress or lands or something, right? Like, I feel if it's turn 10 and Sacrifice player's still around, I'm like, it's fine, still fine, right? Like, you know, like it's not as
But
scary.
all the
Ah.
drain.
I don't know
All
if
the
that's
drain.
true, right? They have so many combos that win out of nowhere.
But
What
they're
about, like, a
multi-card
Yegra? We saw
combos,
Yegra
right?
recently.
They're
right?
multi-cards, yeah.
It's not like
There's,
a
like-
2-card combo, right? It's a lot.
They
And
are
then you can still interact
though.
with instant speed removal, usually, right?
That's strong.
That
All right.
destroys it, which usually triggers something.
Okay.
Yeah, but the problem with Enchantress is you destroy, but they drew 5 cards as you did this, right? So they're gonna go again. Whereas you might draw one or two, but I don't know. We'll leave it up here, wedged between Enchantress and Graveyard. So last category, the ominous creatures category. That's a catch-all for
Creatures.
everything. This playing lots of creatures of the same type. A vampire deck like Edgar Markov. Maybe playing creatures of some theme like White Weenie. All your creatures are power 2 or less. Maybe the green version. All your creatures are power 4 or 4 or more, 3 or more. Stompy decks. Generally, you play creatures, you gain value, and then you somehow attack and win, usually with an overrun effect or something, or a Moonshaker Cavalry, Craterhoof Behemoth, something like that. Where do we put
The
creatures?
sheer number of powerful like creature types that can be put together is outweighed by the sheer number of bad ones. So I guess because of that, I'd put it probably at about a B, even though I think some of the archetypes are really strong. Like I think humans are really good. So if I'm thinking humans, I'm gonna go A. If I'm thinking like, depends on the creature type. This is so broad. It's so hard. I like fairies, right? Fairies, you let me get enough of that, I'm gonna counter you out of the game. You're pretty much locked. If I'm humans, I've light stacked you out of the game, but with anthems and ways to just dodge all of your like removal. There's, I don't know. If I'm like, I don't know, dinosaurs, I'll probably just die to like a board wipe or something, right? Like a star
What,
fixing.
dinosaurs actually
Dinosaur
kind of
could be
scary.
good.
Dinosaurs actually kind of scary.
I'm talking about an honest dinosaur deck, not a cheat 'em out deck. I'm talking about like I'm watching you play really bad
Like a
dinosaurs.
My
Gulsa
boyfriend has
deck, a
Gishat
Gishat
and
deck. These are all
Stamp,
terrifying decks, I think.
Sure, but are those okay? Then maybe
I would
maybe
throw
dinosaurs the wrong
Kiskin.
answer.
If Kiskin hit the
Sure,
battlefield,
Kithkin.
if skeletons
Yeah.
hit the battlefield, you're like, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
But if
But
they're
if you
like
see vampires
Gulta.
and wizards, they're
Yeah,
also
I mean-
like
They're very
I
strong.
don't know. This is hard because there's so many.
The
really
category is just so
busted creature
broad.
types.
It's just so
Yeah.
broad, right? Like that's kind of the challenge, I think, of it. When it comes down to it with creatures, you got to play the board and you got to play into the Rast. Like you have ways to play around that, but I think compared to something like artifacts or lands or enchantress or sacrifice that have more like win out of nowhere potential, I feel like it's got to rank behind those. And beyond that, it's like just so tough because it really comes like Edgar Markov's busted, but then there's many, like Kunr was saying, like other creature decks that are very not busted, and I'm not scared of them at all. So it really just comes down to your deck and your archetype and the commander. There's so many sub archetypes and creatures.
Yeah, I put it as a B just because, yeah, there is high variance, but the thing that all of them kind of suffer from is that they have the most pain points in terms of interaction. You're playing creatures, and so creatures are the easiest thing for all colors, all decks to actually interact with. Most of the board wipes hit them, as
I
opposed to
don't
like
think
enchantments
that's
to get it.
True for a lot
No?
of creature types, though, right? As the years go on, you're getting more ways to get around the interaction, right? Like you have all your creatures have hexproof or something like that, right? Or
Yeah, like
like
Miriam's pretty
the
good for
Wandering
that.
Rescuer, right? Tap creatures have hexproof, things like that. So as it gets a lot harder to interact with, like the humans deck can't. It is a deck that I don't really care about board wipes because most of the time I just get around them. So I don't. It depends on the archetype, but I guess in this exact case, there are more creature types that can get hit by board wipes. But now Clever Concealment is like in every white creature deck. There is a lot of ways to get around board wipes now. So I don't
But, like,
know.
There's a reason
The
we
thing
run
is-
so many board wipes. It's because we're scared of creatures, right?
Yes.
And the difference, I would say the plus for creatures is they have strong effects while building a respectable board, right? So like a blank deck, you have an effect, draw a card, but it comes with a 1/1, right? But if I play a Gulta, which is dump my hand, and there's a 7/7 on the battlefield, right? Or like an Avenger of Zendikar or something, right? Like there's a lot of creatures that demand an answer immediately while having a very strong effect, right? And of course, if you just count green decks, like I might put them above lands and artifacts, right? If you're just like,
Mhm.
last of the March ends after playing my Gulta, right? Draw 12 and you're at threat of dying instantly, right? Like that's kind of scary, right? So the benefit of creatures is you get the effect while building probably the strongest board on the battlefield that you can threaten lethal with, that people need to answer. So you can keep like quote unquote getting away with it, right? Like, you play
they
a
can
creature,
attack
draw
you.
3 cards, they deal with the board. You play more creatures, they deal with the board. You play more creatures, they run out of answers, they die. So And then, of
What if you
course,
run out of
there's the
creatures
bad
first?
creatures. Yeah, there's the bad
Yeah.
creatures. You play Kitskin, they wipe the board, you pack it up, go home, right? So it kind of balances out, right? But
Yeah.
creatures are the name of the game in Magic, right? Everything ETBs, does something immediately, has hexproof and ward, crazy stat lines. So I think it's probably one of the strongest in casual Commander, right? Especially when we start metagaming out the unfair stuff, right? Like once Spellslinger is not allowed, once Stax is not allowed, you know what's allowed? Your 2-mana 7/7 that's like beating everyone's face down, right? No one blinks an eye at that one, and that's very strong, right?
I mean, it's what it feels like what Commander was originally built for. Like that's the main appeal. Is everybody if they're new to Commander, first thing they go for is like a creatures based deck. I think is like
Yep.
very natural behavior. So I think it's the baseline for me in terms of like what to expect in a game. And yeah, it's good to have the biggest board state. You can't attack me because I have the biggest creatures, and then also I can swing at you, so you have to deal with it. I think Richard's right on that.
All right, so this is our tier list. Are we happy in general? Is there anything like grossly out of place here? This looks roughly correct.
I think Mill should be lower.
I don't think I'm
that
going
looks
to
pretty
answer
good.
that. I don't think I'm going to answer.
Mill might be a little
Are you
high
trying to move
otherwise.
Bill up the
Otherwise,
S
we're good.
script?
I genuinely think Mill is a B tier, like a B tier archetype.
I don't.
All right, we're gonna leave
No.
the podcast chat. This is our list. Let us know. Let us know what you think. I think this is roughly right. I mean, Bill,
Yeah.
even moving Bill up one, like it doesn't really dramatically change much, right?
Yeah.
Let us know
Looks
what
pretty
you
close.
think. Let us know if we've missed any broad archetypes. We didn't list like aggro or something. It was like maybe too broad. Maybe creatures was already too broad. But let us know if we missed anything.
That.
And then we'll see y'all back here next week.